Okay, sweet. So we have an official debate happening. We have Jiva here. We have Deonteleologist. For this debate, Jiva's defending the proposition that deontology, I almost said deonteleology, deontology and non-theism are incompatible. Deonteleologist is taking the opposition. As always, when we base upon who concedes, we don't get a vocal concession from either participant. We'll put it to a voting poll in which you, the audience, can vote on who you think performed better in the debate. There will be no moderation, no time limit. You guys can get started.
Yeah, so do you want me to just start by outlining my position, Deon?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Did you hear me? Sorry. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, you cut out there. Yeah, fine. Right, so I'll just start by outlining my position, which is so my view is that right and morality can only be based in religion or theism or spiritual philosophy. Otherwise, it's just an opinion. And so I think without theism, if you're a naturalist, I would argue that you have limited options: moral nihilism, moral relativism, or you could create a utilitarian framework of ethics. But I don't think deontology is an option. So that's basically where I'm at, and obviously you can ask questions if you need any more clarification on that.
Okay, that's interesting. So you said without theism, whatever moral views you have sort of reduced to opinions. But then you also said that you could create like a utilitarian framework.
Yes, so you're right. Yeah, so that would still be subjective, but I think you can create at least an objective goal, shall we say, which everybody agrees on. So that's the difference between a utilitarian framework, which many naturalists do try and do, the likes of Sam Harris, etc., compared to what I would say is, deontology or like a Kantian categorical imperative, that sort of framework.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
why I mean, you said that everyone agrees on. You mean like what do you mean? Because obviously it's not the case that everyone agrees utilitarianism is correct.
Well, yeah, exactly. So I'm just arguing hypothetically here. I think that still has significant problems. But let's say, for example, everybody agreed on a set goal. So let's say everybody agreed on that it's right to increase utility or increase well-being, right? And then you could create an objective framework of trying to achieve that goal.
Okay. But okay. So hypothetically then but you still think that wouldn't show that utilitarianism is true. Just I mean, even if that happened, I would probably be inclined to agree.
Yes, yeah. It wouldn't be true from an ontological point of view, but it would be a reasonable framework, shall we say, for a naturalist to build their moral framework upon. Um,
Okay. Okay. So you said a Kantian categorical imperative is
mhm.
this is the thing that we're debating, right? Whether something
Yeah.
like the categorical imperative can be justified without theism.
Yes.
Okay. And the reason that it can't is
Well, because I think what it boils down to it's just Immanuel Kant's opinion, right? He's created a system, a rule for objective ethics, but I could come out and produce an alternative rule book. And I don't see why his would have any more truth value over mine.
okay. So but if he gave an argument and you couldn't come up with convincing objections to the argument, you couldn't show that the argument was faulty in any serious
Yeah.
way, then you would agree with it, right?
Well, if he could prove that it was a law of the universe, yeah, sure. But I
A
think
law.
a universal law. Well, when I say that, if he could, see, that's the thing. I don't think he ever can do that. But I mean, I understand the process of formulating the Kantian categorical imperative, and I applaud him for it. I think it's got
Okay.
merit. But
Okay.
Yeah, but I just don't think ontologically it holds true.
So, what is your understanding of how he goes about justifying it?
Right. So I think it's the universalizability principle for one. So he would argue that any action that, if universalized, would lead to undesirable outcomes would be immoral, shall we say. So, for example, murder, theft. If everybody murdered, everybody would end up dead. So nobody benefits. If everybody stole, nobody benefits. Everybody ends up either poorer or the same, right? Well, the same, shall we say. And so, because there's no benefit in that, there's no, there's no gain. Therefore, it's deemed an immoral act, according to him. Is that a fair summary?
I think that's it's pretty close, but so one thing is he wouldn't like the focus on outcomes or desires
Mhm.
because he thinks that um a categorical imperative because it holds necessarily and it holds to all for all rational beings. It can't be grounded in anything really empirical. So it
Mm.
has to be grounded in a priori concepts. So
Yeah.
something like whether it would be desirable is not what he wants to focus on, but on
Mm.
whether uh, we could consistently judge it to be good. That's what he thinks
Mhm.
it is to will something. So for him, a judgment, or to say that like that you can consistently will some maxim to become a universal law, for him is basically to say that you can consistently hold the judgment it would be good if this maxim became a universal law.
Mhm.
Um, also, uh,
Can I
so
clarify
I
one
think,
thing there?
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So when you say it would be good, I mean, isn't that edging towards consequentialism itself, though?
Well, it's uh, not edging towards consequentialism. I mean, it's 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 asking whether you can judge some state of affairs to be
Hmm.
good. Um, it's
Yeah,
not
but he,
it's only edging towards consequentialism in the sense that it asks what would the consequences be if this maxim were universalized. But
yeah, and
you
that's
can
my point. That's my
it's
point.
no. Okay.
No?
But it's not asking a sorry, go ahead.
No, no, I was going to say, yeah, that's my point, because essentially he is judging the goodness of an action based on a consequence, really, isn't he?
No, because consequentialists judge the goodness of actions based on the consequences of those actions. It's not
Hmm.
consequentialism to judge an action based on the consequences of a world of the hypothetical state of affairs in which everyone adopted the maxim underlying that action. That's not consequentialism.
Mm.
Consequentialism judges the merits of action X on
Hmm.
by the consequences of action X.
Yeah. Whereas he's judging it, you're saying, if as if it was a universal principle, a universal maxim.
Hmm.
Okay. Okay. I mean, I can see your argument there. Okay. Sorry, I interrupted you. You can
No problem.
continue. Yeah.
Um, it's yeah, no, it's a worthy distinction. So the right, so Kant does discuss the formula of universal law first, and the way he gets to the formula of universal law is, I think, really clever. He
Hmm.
says, look, human beings are rational beings, and as rational beings, well, he starts with the common sense idea of morality, which I think
Yeah.
is right and pretty accurate, is
Hmm.
that to say something is morally permissible or morally impermissible is let's focus on impermissible. That's easier for the purposes of an example. To say that something is morally impermissible in some set of circumstances is to say that somebody who were to do that action in that set of circumstances should not have done it, not even if they basically irrespective of their goals, right? So he distinguishes the categorical imperative from the hypothetical. The hypothetical is just you should do something if you want this thing to come about. But he says even if you had no desires for anything to come about, it would be the case that you should not do this impermissible thing. So that's the sort of the categorical element, and then there's the universal element, which is to say when we think that someone in circumstances C should not have performed action A, what we mean is anyone in circumstances C should not perform action A.
Mm-hmm.
So we agree there?
Yeah, I agree there. Yeah.
Okay,
I
great.
understand.
So he says, from this, what can we learn about the content of a categorical imperative, if there were one? He says, well, thinking about it, the only law that could govern the wills of all rational beings, he says to only act in ways that all rational beings could act. So he's just sort of done this little clever trick of like putting the categorical and the universal elements together in a certain way that shows well, what could it possibly tell us aside from just requiring us to act in ways that it would be acceptable if everyone acted? So that's just to get to the formula of universal law. But then after the formula of universal law, he says, well, all we've shown right now is what a moral law would look like if there were a moral law that actually did have authority on the wills of all rational beings. But where does it get that authority, right? And I think that this is the probably going to be the point that you're trying to push back on is, look, without God, there can be no formula of universal law because where's the authority come from? And so what Kant says is it actually comes from well, Kant was a theist, but he seemed to think that theism was unnecessary, although he wrote some things that contradicted himself over the years. But what he says in the groundwork, at least, is that, well, the authority comes from humanity itself. And what humanity is for him in this context is just rational nature or rational agency, which is the ability to sort of set goals for yourself rather than just having sort of natural forces set goals for you, as he thinks animals live.
Yeah.
The ability to set goals for yourself. And so his argument for it basically goes like this. Every human being sees themselves and their own existence as having a certain sort of value. Because what it is to be a human being is to set goals for yourself, right? And if to have a goal isn't the same thing as having a desire, because you could have a desire that you don't approve of, but to have a goal is to have is to see. You don't have a goal unless you see that goal as worth achieving, right? And where does the desire to achieve that goal come from? It comes from yourself. And so the idea is, look, because every human being sees themselves and their existence as valuable, I have no right to so everyone sees themselves as valuable, right? So right now all we've shown is that I see myself as valuable, but why should I treat anyone else like they're valuable? Kant says, I mean, I have no rational justification for treating my existence as valuable. I have no better rational justification for doing that than any of the other rational agents, every other person. Right? So just from the point of view of logic and reasoning, I am required epistemically, right? I have no better epistemic justification for treating myself as valuable than for treating everyone else as valuable. And therefore, I ought to treat every human being as an end in themselves and never merely as a means. So that's
Yeah.
basically the argument.
Okay. No, I understand, and thank you for taking the time to explain it so thoroughly. But yeah, I mean, I suppose one of my first contentions will be that statement, isn't it? That premise, I am valuable. So what you're saying is it really relies on that premise, doesn't it? His whole moral system relies on that premise that I am valuable, and therefore I should treat others as I, ought to be treated myself, or as I wish to be treated myself, right? But that's not an ontological truth, is it?
No, that's the whole point of it. Is it doesn't need there's no outside justification, really, than first person affirmation of one's own value.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So, I mean, so that's my argument. So, as I said, I mean, I think really an objective moral code can only apply if you have a moral authority to appeal to, right? So, even though I agree with everything that you said, and I agree with Kant's formulation and the way you described it, but I still don't see what his grounding is for this moral code. I still don't see why somebody can't come along and say, Emmanuel, I disagree with you. I produce my own objective code, which doesn't rely on this I am valuable, therefore you are valuable premise. And it results in different conclusions, different moral codes and rules. I don't see how Kant can argue that his is ontologically true and theirs isn't.
What are you meaning by ontologically here?
Yeah. So sorry. What I mean is, what I mean is that there is actually an objective moral code um, that operates within within the universe and is applicable to us, right? Which is, and the only way that could operate is if it, well, not the only way, but the most conventional way that could operate is if it was set by a moral authority. The same way that, for example, the rules of chess are objective, aren't they? Because they're created by the creator of chess. Right. Without the creator of chess, you just have a chessboard with 32 pieces. You can make any rules you want, right? And you might be able to work out the rule of chess. You might be able to work out a game of chess, right? But without that moral authority, without that creator of the rules, you will never have an objective set of rules. They're just going to be your opinion, your creation, aren't they?
Well, what he would say is, or at least what I'm inclined to say, what he would say is that we create the rules ourselves, that we, as autonomous rational beings, are the moral lawgivers. Because all it takes is for you to see yourself as valuable and for you to see yourself as rational. And seeing yourself as the kind of being for whom things can be better or worse, and also seeing yourself as rational, subject to the laws of logic, basically. That those two things take you to the formula of universal law and the formula of humanity, because the laws of logic require you to recognize that you have no better reason to value yourself than to value all others, and you
Well,
value yourself.
yeah, well, that's still an axiomatic, that's still a premise, isn't it, which one has to accept. But when we talk about ontology, aren't we talking about, what things actually are, what is true in reality? So, for example, the laws of physics, they're true. I mean, are you arguing then in this sense that there is a moral law which operates, which is true to the same degree that the laws of physics are true?
same degree. I mean, I don't know about degrees of truth, but I think yeah, that yes, that there is a moral law, and that if, I mean, I don't know much about physics, but I trust the physicists who tell us that there are these physical laws. Um, and I think, yeah, ontologically, it's true that rational beings are a distinct kind of being, right? Some beings are rational, other beings are not rational. Um, and for rational beings, there are moral laws which they are bound to follow on the basis of their rationality.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue. See, I have because, as you said, some beings are rational, some beings are not rational. So, if we lived in a world where the majority, or let's say everybody, was irrational, this moral law wouldn't exist, would it?
No,
According to you, but
so it's an equivocation. So there's
yeah,
rational beings here, just being beings who have the capacity to reason. Not
yeah,
being, not saying that they're rational in their choices that people make. Like everyone, all people make irrational choices, and
hmm
have irrational beliefs, right?
hmm
Um, I'm just talking about beings that have the capacity to reason.
yeah. Okay, no, I understand that distinction. So, I guess I'll come back to my point where if you have a moral authority, say, for example, obviously, we'll refer to God in this instance. And God sets the rules of the game, shall we say, like the creator of chess sets the rules of chess, and there is an objective standard, right? So, for example, his rules are based on let's say, the path to salvation. He says, right, you must do this act if you want to get to salvation. You must not do this act if you don't want to get to salvation, right? Now that I can accept as an ontological truth if it was true. I'm not arguing for this, but if it was true, I could accept that as an ontological truth. But I can't. I'm struggling to make that leap with what you're presenting and what Immanuel Kant is presenting, because I still don't see how he's basing this in an ultimate truth or an ultimate law of life. I see it just as his opinion, where he's saying we are valuable entities and therefore we should treat others as we want to be treated ourselves. Am I making my point? Are you
Yes.
understanding what?
So
Just
it's not quite that it's not quite that we should treat others the way that we want to be treated ourselves,
yeah,
because
yeah. To
other
simplify.
people might want to be treated in different ways. All
Mm,
he's saying is that you need to respect everyone as you
mhm.
want to be respected yourself. Um, and the truths are this: rational beings see themselves as each rational being sees himself, herself, themselves as rational and as valuable, right? I don't
Mhm.
I can't I can't verify whether um you uh see me, or whether you, like, I can't verify that you're valuable, and I can't
Yeah.
even verify that I am valuable, but I can verify that I see myself as valuable. And because each rational being sees themselves as valuable, and also sees themselves as rational, as able to subject their beliefs and their actions uh, to the laws of logic, and to see whether they're consistent or inconsistent with other of their beliefs, then they must treat one another as ends in themselves. Basically, they must act in ways that it would be acceptable for all other rational beings to act. Now, I'm not one of those deontologists who thinks that there's like an obvious, like, Ten Commandments analog
Mm,
for ethics.
yeah.
But I think uh, so. I mean, I'm not sure whether you mean deontology in the sense of just the usual set senses, like contrasting with consequences, and people say that it's because it's focusing on intentions. Some other people want to say that
Mhm.
it's because of rules or laws. um,
Mhm.
but to me, it's just um, the focus on duty, right? That's what the Greek Deon comes from.
Yeah.
And duty here being um, the obligations we have which follow from the moral law, and just, I mean, I gave the argument as to why it's true. I mean, you can't the I mean, to argue against Kant, you would need to find a rational being who does not see themselves as valuable, or does not see themselves as subject to the laws of logic. And for Kant, I mean, that's just what it is to be a rational being, sort of by definition.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. So you would accept that as an axiomatic truth, that all beings who are rational are consider themselves valuable.
Right. So I mean, you might ask someone, hey, do you, like some rational being, you might ask them, do you think that you are valuable, right? And they might, based on their interpretation of the question, say no. But
Mhm.
all it is for Kant is to set goals for oneself, and I mean, there are a number of things that would indicate that you see yourself as valuable. And I
Yeah.
think even animals see themselves as valuable, right? Like if a being is if you inflict pain on an animal
Mhm.
and you can tell that the animal is like not enjoying it,
Yeah.
it's sort of saying, I don't like this. This is bad for me in some, primitive sense.
Yeah.
And
But I don't know
so
if I would call
it's
that. I don't know if I. Yeah. Sorry.
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I don't know if I would call that seeing themselves as valuable, as opposed to actually just an instinctive response to pain, because we know there are very primitive forms of organisms that respond to pain. You know, I don't know if
Okay.
they have self as such, or they have an experience of self through time. So I'm not
Okay.
sure.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
So let's just focus on humans.
Yeah.
Um,
So I will ask. It may actually be the fact that it would be very difficult to find a rational human being who considers themselves invaluable. But I could actually appeal here to, and this is probably where we're going to part ways, because I'm guessing you don't have the theistic axioms that I'm going to argue for now. But let's say you take someone like in spiritual philosophy, they talk about Jesus, for example, or the Buddha, and Jesus was obviously perfectly rational. I don't think most people would argue with that based on, the information we have regarding his life. But he wouldn't have considered himself of personal value, which is why, in the sense that you're describing, and in the sense that Immanuel Kant is describing, because he himself foretold that, everything that was going to happen to him, the crucifixion and all of this, and yet he still went through it, right, voluntarily and willingly. And actually, we have a similar story even in Eastern traditions with Krishna and the Buddha. They gave up their personal satisfaction and their own personal goals and desires. In fact, the whole spiritual philosophy is based on this idea that one should not have desires and goals, right? So one should renounce and become a hermit. Well, that's a different issue. So I'm saying I think this starting premise as an axiomatic truth is questionable. I don't know whether you want to respond to that.
I mean, I would be willing to like if you could find I mean, so the stories about Jesus in the Bible are not very historically backed up. Some of
Hmm.
them, I mean, apparently there's historical consensus. I've never actually read historians of the era who say that, like, we know that at least a person named Jesus existed. But
Mm.
I've heard arguments on both sides. But um, I'm not so interested whether uh, in whether they're true. I'm just so, for instance, if Jesus were in the process of like healing the sick, or um, feeding the poor, and somebody came
Hmm.
up and tried to stop him from doing it, then would he just let them stop him? Because if he would try to continue to do it, then that
Hmm.
seems to me to be, that's all, at least in the Kantian sense, it is to have a goal, right? I mean, if he didn't see the goal of healing the sick as valuable, then if he were doing it like just for fun and somebody came up and stopped him, then
Mhm.
he would just sort of leave and do something else. But
Yeah,
our intuitive sense is that no, he cares about this. He's going to do it.
yeah. I mean, I would argue that he's not doing it out of a sense of valuing it or enjoying it as such. But you are
It's
right.
not
It may,
out of his sense. No, he's not
yeah,
doing he doesn't have to be doing it for any reason. It's just that he cares. He's invested in it. That's part of um of that
yeah.
point.
I don't know if I would go as far as to say that either, but I may concede actually that he's doing it out of a sense of duty. But I don't know whether we can conflate duty and value here. Do you see them almost interchangeably, having a
So
sense of duty and
to do something out of duty, I think um clearly is probably like the clearest example of a distinctively rational way of acting, right? Like we don't
Mhm.
say animals do things out of duty, right?
No.
So a person doing something out of duty would clearly indicate that they're a rational being.
Mhm.
And when Kant's saying that every person sees themselves as valuable, it's not in the sense of um like important or of like it's not in any weakly narcissistic sense. It's just a sort of that there are things for me, there are ways my life could go that are better or worse.
Mhm.
And that's essentially it.
Yeah. Yeah, in that sense, I suppose you are separating duty from value. So you would say somebody acting out of duty is acting. That's more to do with their rationalism or their rationality rather than their that feeling of value of themselves, right? Um, so I would argue that I think my point still holds. Like you're right. I mean, it's probably very difficult to find just go on the street and find people who who are rational who don't value themselves. But my argument is that I think there have been people in the past, and I think spiritual philosophy is largely based on the principle that one shouldn't consider themselves valuable. Um, yeah, I think there may be a contradiction there. I mean, we may just have to agree to disagree on that.
Sure. I mean, you gave me two examples that are not very historical examples. My,
Mm,
my my even if someone were to become like a Buddhist monk who
mhm,
renounces all worldly desires, right?
yeah.
Uh, that their decision to do that, right? They're making
Mhm,
that a goal for themselves. That's the sense in which one is a rational being,
yeah.
right? And so uh, it doesn't mean that I should, um, for instance, how do I put this? That doesn't threaten the existence of any that doesn't threaten the definition of rational beings in the relevant
Mhm,
sense. So a rational being is one who sees themselves as the kind of beings for whom things can be better or worse, and
mhm,
who um, establishes ends for themselves, right? And so
mhm,
the 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 Buddhist monk is as much a rational being as any.
mhm. Yeah, I'm not disputing the rationality of the Buddhist monk. It was more the value idea, the self value.
Right, but I mean, to set a goal is the value of it's a difficult word for this context because it has many
Mhm,
um, potential meanings. The value here is just in the sense that by making something a goal, one is expressing a sort of value, value to which one or with which one associates that goal. If you didn't have if you have a goal, the question, why do that goal rather than something else, applies. It's a relevant question, and in answering that, you are expressing why you feel that goal to have a certain kind of value in the relevant sense, not in the not in the transcendent
Yeah.
sense.
Okay. I mean, obviously, here we're presuming that these monks and these so-called spiritually enlightened people are functioning with the same sort of mind structure and mind state that we are. But granted, I mean, I think that's all we can work on, really, isn't it? And that's all that Immanuel Kant could work on, that premise. But I would like to ask, do you think this categorical imperative is complete in and of itself? I mean, to form a good moral framework, a good,
Not at all.
a good.
No.
Okay.
And I don't think he does either. If you read,
No.
so Kant basically took this as a sort of meta-ethical project establishing what a moral law for all rational beings would look like. And he said, this does not at all answer the question of how human rational beings should answer this question. And so he has to write a whole other book for that, and it's the Metaphysics of Morals, which he wrote towards the end of his life. And there's a lot of stuff that you probably wouldn't expect from Kant if you thought that the formula of universal law and the formula of humanity were supposed to somehow be substantive action guiding principles. They're not. For Kant, they're not. You need a lot of culture and moral education and consideration of how, what it like scientific questions about human beings to come up with to really fill in the substance of your morality. But go ahead.
Yeah. So, I was going to ask, do you see that as a problem then? I mean, does one have to rely on other frameworks then, or do you think that you can still base it all in deontology?
Well, what I think is that what deontology gives us is a really basic starting point. But as you notice, some things are clearly ruled out by deontology. Like deontology clearly rules out lying to your friend for no purpose other than self-gain, right? Clearly, if everyone does that, then there will be no more communication, and you can't even lie successfully, right? And so, I mean, and Kant, with his examples, seems to show that he thinks it entails a lot, but I don't think it's really specifically a problem for deontology. I think they're going to be that's a problem for virtue ethics too, is the fact that oh, you should act how a virtuous person would act doesn't tell you shit until you know what it is to be a virtuous person in a particular culture with a certain set of values and that sort of thing. And it's why I think utilitarianism is sort of culturally illiterate, because in our culture we care a lot about pleasure, but there are cultures that who could care less and who value all sorts of other things. So I mean, I think pluralism is important in ethics, and I think that the sort of stuff you get from Kant's categorical imperative is just the stuff that actually is transcendent and universal, and holds across cultures. The specifics of moral obligations is going to come from particular attention to circumstances and cultures and all that. But there are some things that it clearly rules out.
Yeah, and that's the issue, isn't it? Some things. I mean, I know it's obviously hard to sort of judge all of them. I mean, to write a list of all the moral, virtues or all the moral commandments. But I mean, it is quite limited, isn't it? The categorical imperative. I mean, there's only probably a handful of things you can probably fit into it, right?
Um, I don't know. But the important question is what the things that you get from it are and how they're framed. Because I didn't say that lying was completely ruled out. I said lying for a particular purpose, right? And in a
Hmm.
certain set of circumstances. So
Mm.
presumably you could fill in like an infinite number of circumstances and purposes, and the categorical imperative will tell you whether acting with that is in accordance with duty or not. Um,
Hmm.
how limited it is going to depend on how much you expect from it. But I don't think it um,
Yeah.
to have a deontological system doesn't require you to have a robust deontological system, right? Maybe
True.
maybe your belief in God um, can or your belief in a specific religion will give you a more
Yeah.
robust sense of deontology than what you get from the categorical imperative. But
Yeah.
it doesn't mean you can't get a deontology without God.
Yeah, well, I can see the argument you're making, certainly. But just to come back to one point you made, the lying, can't that I thought that could be fitted into the categorical imperative, absolutely, can't it?
Well, so a lot of people like to say that sort of thing. Kant doesn't say it
Mhm.
in the groundwork. Kant makes an
Mhm.
argument against lying of all forms in another piece
Mhm.
where he talks about like the murderer who comes to your door. Um, but
Yeah.
I think Kant was misapplying um, the
Yeah.
categorical imperative
Categorical
there,
imperative.
and a
Yeah.
lot of other Kantians have said so. I think Kant was
Yeah.
wrong about lying.
Yeah. So for example, if the murderer came to your door, you would be happy to, not happy. I mean, you would lie to save the life of somebody in the house. You wouldn't
Right.
agree with him.
I would think
Yeah.
that that
Okay.
is yeah. So did you? I mean, when you say you concede, what do you mean? That you can have a deontological system without God, just maybe not a very robust one? I can't hear you. I don't know if this is my problem or.
I'm not sure because
Oh,
my
there you are.
reception's quite
I hear
bad
you now.
sometimes. You're cutting out for me.
I hear you now, though.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, you're cutting out a little bit. Yeah, so, sorry, what was your question, Dion? I missed that
M-
because it
I
cut
heard you
out.
say the words "I concede," but I didn't know exactly what you meant by concede. Like, are you conceding that deontology is compatible with non-theism? It's just not a very robust deontology?
I'm not sure if I would go all the way there, but I suppose I can see that, I can see that you can create, a framework using the Kantian categorical imperative, right? But you see, I still struggle to make that leap to calling it deontology because I just still don't see it as objective truth or ontologically, or I don't see it as ontology essentially, right? Um, because I still think it comes down to his personal opinion, and I understand your premise that people are rational and consider themselves valuable, and it's built up from that premise, and it logically follows. But I still don't see why, if another person came along and said, propose their own sort of moral code, that I don't see what grounds you would have to say I'm right and you're wrong.
Well, I mean, I think, for instance, like let's say a utilitarian came along and they tried to argue that, like, um, you know, you should, in the trolley problem case, right? Like you should pull the
Mhm.
lever. I don't
Yeah.
think that deontology tells you is the kind of deontology that I like. I don't think deontology gives you a straightforward answer to the trolley
Mhm.
problem, and I don't think the deontology that I like is incompatible with utilitarian answers to certain questions. For instance,
Mhm.
um, do utilitarians think that uh, everyone should be a utilitarian? If they don't, then I think that shows that their position is self-defeating. And if they do, then I think that that shows that they accept the formula of universal law. And do utilitarians think that we should treat all other human beings as that we have no rational justification for treating ourselves as any more valuable than any other beings? If they do accept that, then I think that shows they accept the formula of humanity. Um,
Mhm.
and whether you can whether those things require certain applications in certain contexts, like the trolley problem, um, that's a further question. I just think that anyone who has any kind of moral system at all, unless it's like a nihilism or something like that, um,
Yeah.
is going to like this is what we've deduced these things from just an understanding of morality and of rational and of the nature of rational beings.
What do you mean? Did you swap things? Did you stop our current moral practices?
We know we've deduced the formula of humanity and the formula of universal law.
Yeah, yeah. But I suppose a theist would counter argue that by saying, morality is objective and it's a set of rules which is given by a moral authority, right?
Well, we can say that I would say that yeah, moral I would say both of those things that morality is well, I don't know about a set of rules, but I would say that morality is objective and that morality is given by an authority. Here the authority would just be sort of rational nature. Um
Mhm.
and if
Mm.
a theist came along and said like I have a different morality, it's like the 10 commandments, then
Mhm.
they yeah, they would disagree, but I don't think they would go beyond the basic points that I made,
Mhm.
unless they think that actually there's some sort of ontology within human beings, like natural slaves and natural masters. Then they would disagree with the formula of humanity, probably. But I think that they would
Yeah.
be irrational to do so.
Okay. No, I think you made a very nice argument here. But then I suppose one question I would have for you is then if you can present such a solid argument for objective morality from a naturalistic worldview, then why is it that most naturalists don't think that they have an objective morality, isn't it? They think morality is subjective, and that's probably the biggest argument you hear from theists, isn't it, against atheists or naturalists, that they can't actually ground a morality and make it objective. It's all subjective, or it's relative, moral cultural relativism, or it results in moral nihilism. So why do you think naturalists have this problem?
Probably because they haven't read Kant.
But sure, I mean, I've come across a lot of discussions with moral
So
philosophers. Who- Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, I think a lot of people, I think a huge part of the problem comes from the common misunderstanding that the formula of humanity and the formula of universal law are supposed to be like action guiding principles that everyone can use in everyday life. Um,
Mhm.
I think they clearly rule out certain things, but um, I mean, my own view is that there is a degree of cultural relativism, but it doesn't threaten the
Mhm.
objectivity of morality because um, when you use a Kantian framework, the what you're testing the morality of is a maxim, which is the way I understand it. Um, to
Mhm.
perform a certain action for a certain purpose in a certain set of circumstances. And of course, the purposes that are going to be salient and the common sets of circumstances people are going to find themselves in are highly culturally determined. So there's a lot of room for cultural relativity that doesn't threaten the objectivity of morality itself. So that's I mean,
Okay.
I'm working on developing this view,
Mhm.
and I think that probably the person whose moral naturalism I find most convincing, who calls himself a relativist, is David Wong, and he has a view that says basically like I'm a pluralist in some sense. Like there are some cultures that have moralities that are just bad, that we can say are just bad. Like I guess probably like cultures that are homophobic to the point of like killing gay people who are
Yeah.
caught performing
Mhm.
homosexual acts. Um, but once we get past a certain point, there's like relativism, and I'm saying that's true, but that doesn't
Mhm.
mean morality is relative. Like it just means that um, on my view, it means that there's this basic set which comes from respecting humanity, right? Which comes from the basic
Yeah.
points of the groundwork. And then cultural particularities are going to have a huge role in shaping the specifics of each moral framework. But
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that like it's still not objectively true of certain people in particular circumstances that they have a duty to do some action. It just means that we have to take into consideration when doing this moral analysis the purposes and the circumstances, and those are going to be culturally determined
Yeah.
very often.
Okay. Okay. No, thank you. So, no, yeah, I'm grateful. To be honest, I'm quite new to this topic myself. I'm trying to sort of work out my own sort of system here. So yeah, no, I appreciate your insights. I had a very fruitful conversation earlier with Foot Soldier as well, who made who made me see things quite well. He sort of just informed me a little bit. But I'm still not 100% convinced. But I'll go back and maybe do some extra thinking on it. Was there anything else you wanted
Cool.
to add or ask?
No, I think I am pretty pretty happy with how the
Yeah.
conversation went. And it was productive as well. I agree. Thanks for being
Okay.
such a good
Cool.
interlocutor.
Yeah.
Cool. So you guys are all good on closing statements?
Yeah, I am
Yeah.
at
Sorry,
least.
Sam. It keeps cutting out. I haven't heard. I couldn't hear anything you just said.
Oh, I said thank you for being such a good interlocutor. It was a productive conversation. I don't know if you heard me saying that. Hopefully, you'll see it on the
Yeah. No.
video.
Likewise.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Thanks a lot, Deon. I enjoyed it as well, and thank you for being very patient and considerate. I mean, I don't mind. I mean, do you want it to go to a vote? I'm happy to concede. To be honest, I think you probably made the stronger arguments. I mean, you almost convinced me. So I'm sure. I'm sure the audience will be on your side as well.
I mean, your choice whether you want to concede or go to votes.
Yeah, I'm happy to concede. That's fine. I think you did a good job. I should have conceded earlier to Foot Soldier as well, but I was just a bit curious.
All right. Well, happy to hear it. Thank you.